Baruch Spinoza, um, Jewish individual born in Amsterdam. Um, we would probably expect a bit more traditional Jewish or Judeo-Christian thought out of somebody with his upbringing. However, he takes a pretty hard left-hand turn. So we're going to try and follow his and see if we can, I don't know, I guess end up in Wonderland with him. Um, he's an interesting character, and he's got a lot to say, and he's very very careful about his definitions. So if you're going to try and apply some of the things that you think about God or that some of our past philosophers have thought about God, that's not going to work with Spinoza. You really have to be careful and kind of follow him along, because what he has to say, he's going to self-define, and he's going to define it for a reason. He doesn't like it the way that it currently exists, and so there's not a lot that he's not going to be very intentional about defining very specifically. All right, so let's just dive into this. He's been labeled an extreme naturalist philosopher. Very much does Spinoza's idea find a kind of embeddedness in the natural world and in the natural order. His work in Ethics, that's the title of one of his writings, is a really systematic and very harsh critique of sort of what he calls traditional conceptions of God. In that, he argues that well-being and happiness only happen in and through reason, and that ought to sound a lot like Descartes. And then everything else outside of that is totally different. So first, God is a being who is absolutely infinite. And, by the way, unlike Descartes, who starts epistemologically, Baruch Spinoza begins ontologically. He's going to start with an ontology of God and work his way out from there. God is a being that is absolutely infinite. He's a substance, okay, that consists of an infinity of attributes. And so he means that God is infinite because the attributes of God are infinite, not because God as a being is infinite. Notice he didn't really talk about, I said being when I started this conversation about God. For Spinoza, God is more of a substance than a being. And that substance has an infinity of attributes that express the eternal and infinite essence of what God is. Okay, God is the only substance in the universe, period. He's not the only true substance. For Spinoza, God is the only substance in the universe. The universe itself is actually the expression of God. And so the substance that makes up the universe, the substance that makes up us, that makes up the desk, and everything else in it is God. Sounds a little bit pantheistic. Some will argue definitely not pantheistic. Some will definitely argue that he is pantheistic. I don't know. If you're asking me, I'm going to tell you he sounds awfully pantheistic. He's going to tell you that he's not because of the way he defines what exactly God is. So he doesn't own that title. I think he's trying to get out of it with a little bit of a loophole there, because that's one leap he's just not willing to make. I think he's holding on to that monotheistic idea from his upbringing, his embedded theology. But his definition of God and the substances that exist really incline us to think that he's a bit on the pantheistic side. So anyway, because God is the only substance that exists in the universe, then God is totally immanent to everything else that exists. And all existence besides God only exists within God's essence and existence. Okay. So, effectively, God is this. God is an infinity. He's a substance that is an infinite set of attributes expressed infinitely in essence. And that makes God totally infinite and totally immanent to the rest of the substances that exist. Because nothing exists outside of God, everything exists in or through or within the essence and the existence of God. It means a couple of things. One, God is totally immanent to everything that would be talked of as, quote, outside of God. There's really not a concept of something being outside of God for Spinoza. Second, it means that you can't really anthropomorphize God and talk about God as a kind of person. He's not. It's not. God's not. Stick with God. God is not anything you can talk about in human terminologies. He's a substance of infinity, with an infinity of attributes, expressed infinitely and eternally. And because of that, he's the only substance, and everything else derives existence in that substance. All existence is in or within the essence and existence of God. Nature itself acts out from the necessity of the existence and the essence of God. God is necessary because without him, nothing would exist. So nature then acts out from the necessity of the existence of God because nature has to have an existence to act. So God exists as an infinity. Nature exists within that infinity and acts out from that infinity. So nature, human beings, animals, whatever, are expressions of the existence and essence of God. They are ways in which God exists. Be careful with that. Actions and the individual things that exist are expressions from which God exists. He kind of makes nature divine or naturalizes God. It's kind of both. He brings the two sides together so strongly that you can't really tell whether he's making nature divine or making God natural. And just kind of an active force. It is pretty clear God's an active force in Baruch Spinoza. First, he talks about the way nature acts. There is a naturing nature in God that is an active and productive aspect of the universe from which we get everything else. So God has, as part of his essence, a naturing nature, some active, productive part of God that generates the rest of everything else. And then there is a natured nature, those things that are produced and sustained by God's activity. So the natured nature would be like us, who exist, produced and sustained by the nurturing nature of God's essence and existence. He seems to reject, across the board, anything that has to do with God being anywhere near transcendent. God is not outside the natural. God is immanent, completely immanent in everything. So if we want to talk philosophic descriptions of what Baruch Spinoza is applying here, he's a pantheist. Spinoza, however, never accepts that. Never really even comes close to accepting that. But for him, nature is an expression of God, who is totally immanent and cannot be expressed in any other way than the infinity of attributes expressed in the active generation and individual substances that only exist within the essence and existence of God. Okay? So effectively, it's kind of a God in all, through all, around all, God is all kind of thing. We'll pick up more with Spinoza when we tackle next week's material. But he's tough, and he's really strong on this immanent thing. You cannot anthropomorphize or make God in any way transcendent. He is totally immanent to everything we experience in nature.